Welcome to this presentation about ethics in the listening hour. It's nice to see you all wherever you are. And actually, we just had an opening for the whole festival, and all of you who were here were at the opening, except maybe Alice. And so, Alice, just let's take a moment at the beginning, and I invite you to introduce yourself to all of us. You can say where you are and maybe a word or two about your relationship to the listening hour.
Yes. Sorry, I was not at the beginning of the festival. I came just from Italy, and so I'm glad I am here on time. And I made the listening hour guide, the course listening hour guide in 2021. And I did some listening hours during about 1 year I gave. And then I stopped, and now I restart to give listening hours, and I tried to give it not with Zoom. I tried to give live with live sessions, also perhaps with Zoom a little bit, but I want to try it with live sessions. And I live in Switzerland.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we're not going to do introductions again for everyone else, but you can all say hello to Alice and welcome her. So I was asked to talk about ethics, and ethics is very important to me, but I'm not sure I have the last word to say about ethics, and I'm interested in your thoughts about it also. And we are going to focus on the listening hour and ethics in this session, and it's going to have a simple structure. I'm going to give a few introductory remarks, and then we'll have discussion. As simple as that. And to start with, you'll notice behind me, among the books, is my friend who's a frog. His name is Keke. This is Keke. His expression is not, well, you could imagine that he doesn't look very happy.
Yeah.
He's actually not so unhappy, he's just hungry. Because, spring is here, the flies are waking up, but he has had a long winter waiting for the flies, and now they're coming, and he is just hungry. And, well, you don't want to be a fly around anywhere near KK. So, ethics and the listening hour. And why is this an important topic? Well, it's simple. I mean, we want our sessions to be constructive. We want them to be even healing in some way. We don't want to feel eaten. We don't want to even feel almost eaten in a session. We want to feel relief. We want to feel connected. And so what I've thought about is, what can make somebody in a listening hour session not feel so great? What do we as guides need to keep in mind? And well, the listening hour is so stripped down. The listening hour is so simple in a certain way compared to many other methods that many questions don't come up or don't come up as often or as urgently in our sessions. And yet the potential is still there. Um, and what I'm going to share with you today, for those of you who have a background in playback theater, which is most of you, um, it relates to playback as well. And one of the major reasons why ethics is so important is that the listening hour is based on personal material. It's people's real stories. And so they have a particular vulnerability when they're sharing these stories. And like many other fields, we have to take care when people are sharing their personal stories that they they are protected or they don't feel worse afterwards than they did before. And it's not always so easy. Um, yeah. Another reason why ethics is important has to do with the worldwide reach of the listening hour. So, where we might naturally practice with people who are close to us in culture, in background, uh, we're quite likely in the listening hour quite quickly to encounter people in our sessions who have very, very different backgrounds from us. And so that gives us also a special responsibility um, to um, to try as best we can to be sensitive to the differences in the backgrounds of or to know who we're working with. So you can assume if you go into your closest town and do a listening hour session that you may know pretty much who you're working with, whoever they might be. Uh, but do we really know who we're working with? And what can we do to learn who we're working with? Um, and I feel that we have some ethical responsibility to know as much as we can. Um, so I guess I'll say more about that in a minute or two. Um, so what are some issues that we need to be aware of as guides of the listening hour? Um, and when I've thought about this, um, I feel that in most cases it has to do with how skillful we are. That is to say, how well trained we are, um, how competent we are. That is to say that if we're not competent, we're much more likely to to face ethical questions. And I'm going to give you some examples. So what I mean is that good training, good standards of practice have a lot to do with it. And it's one reason why we make an effort and have made an effort in the listening hour to have good training, to have supervision and intervision, and to try to support all of us as a community to have as high a standard of practice as we can. Okay, so what are some examples? The first one that came to my mind was what happens in a listening hour session if you have somebody who is a talker, who is dominant and really wants to talk so much that other people don't get a chance or as much of a chance. Um, well, okay, when I think about this, I think this is not really an ethical issue. You just have to be able to intervene in some way to help this person be quiet or give other people a chance. And that may be true. Maybe it's not an ethical issue. If you don't have the skill to interrupt, to intervene, uh, okay, so the session is kind of boring. This person dominates. Other people don't share the stories. The narrative reticulation is not so strong. Okay, so it's not a great session. But there's another dimension. Um, someone who in society at large may have not had the chance to tell their story, once again, doesn't have the chance. Um, so, a pattern is reinforced rather than transformed. Um, so even with a talker, even with someone who talks too much, it feels to me like underneath there is an ethical dimension. Um, okay, another example would be in our reprise, where we might do a reprise and be in some way evoking each of the stories that have been told. And we kind of space out and we leave one person out. This can happen quite easily. Um, and yet, so it's a skill thing. We know that the reprise is very challenging. We know we need to take an artistic risk, uh, and we end up kind of missing out on one person or one story. But clearly, there is an ethical dimension to that also, because that person will feel or may feel they haven't been heard, they haven't been listened to, uh, may feel kind of heavy in some way rather than light. Um, so this is tough. I mean, uh, it places an extra burden on us, but it's there. Uh, and it's a reason to uh, keep working on our reprises so we can be confident that we're not going to leave somebody out. Uh, and of course, to be sure, in the reprise, you don't need to mention each person. I'm not saying that. There are many ways to do the reprise, but you don't want to mention four of the stories and leave out the fifth. Um, or there is an ethical dimension to that. Um, a more obvious ethical issue is failing to provide sufficient closure for a session. So again, we learn that we need to find an ending. We need to have a good ending. We want people to be ready to return to their everyday life. And what we do for the closure will depend on each session and the stories that are told. But we need to be sensitive to when, for any individual in your session, ending may be difficult. And if we feel that, then do we know what to suggest or what to say so that ending, so that they're ready to end? So this is a challenge because the listening hour is so compact, 1 hour or more or less, and we move into it. It may be intense, and then we move out of it. Um, so Give you an example. During the pandemic, when the listening hour started, as you all know, and many people were in lockdown, were uh, unable to leave their house. Many people were alone in lockdown, and some people were under more stress than others. And so this experience of coming together and sharing stories and feeling connected, and then suddenly being alone again, not so easy. Um, and so, what can we do? What do we do? Well, we don't, we'll see what we want to get into, but we don't need to necessarily talk about specific ideas. But the point is that we have some responsibility to find a closure that works for everybody. And we may need to take longer than at other times. We may even need follow-up of some kind. Let me ask you, how many of you have had the experience after a listening hour session where you have followed up or felt the need to follow up with somebody in your session? Just hold your hand up. I just want to see. Okay, good. So that's almost half. Uh, I'm not saying anything about you should or you shouldn't, but when you're worried afterwards about somebody, uh, when you're either because of just something you have felt or something they've said, or because you're worried that maybe your closure wasn't sufficient for that person, then why not follow up? And of course, there are many ways to do that. And we we did at one point, as the listening hour got going, and it was smack in the middle of the pandemic. I don't know if you remember, but I think through the web page, we asked people who are professionals in mental health to volunteer to support guides who might actually want to do more than an email or a personal follow-up, actually uh, in some way invite that person to do more. Uh, so it's I guess just a kind of mindfulness that we want to have. I guess that's what I'm emphasizing. Um, and I will say, warm up um, again. The warm up or how we move into the session is kind of a question of skill. Obviously, as I've been saying, you want to you want people to be ready to share stories. Um, but part of the skill is helping people gauge what to tell uh, at this moment. And if your warm up, uh, you could have a very directed or confronting warm up that could um, stimulate somebody to tell something that perhaps isn't containable in this short format. Um, we need to have a certain ethical responsibility during the warm up as well. Um, you know, I think of uh, I think of a time. This is a playback story when a fairly new group in a big city did a performance, and I think uh, without many short forms beforehand, they asked people to shut their eyes and think about their first sexual experience,
Right.
and then ask for stories. I know, amazing, right? Um, So we could say, well, yeah, okay, well, it's not so serious because actually, who's going to raise their hand? I mean, who's going to really follow along with that kind of suggestion? But often somebody will. And how will they feel afterwards? Um, and so forth. Okay. Um, so I kind of spoke before about the context or background of your participants in the listening hour session. And, we're all mysteries to each other. And it's a beautiful thing because that's one of the reasons why listening to each other's stories is so enriching. And yet, um, I feel that it can be helpful to to know what we can about our participants. So, there are social political issues, and of course, with social media and how um, often we get news from each other, as well as I said, the worldwide reach of playback. Um, do you know what do you know or what do you not know about who's in your sessions? Um, do you know that there is a momentous election in South Africa next week or the week after? So that may not be important to your South African teller, but it might be. I might be behind the story. It might reflect, and if you have no knowledge of that, then as the guide, you can't be the bridge. You can't help be a bridge between the teller and the listeners. Or do you know about the floods in Brazil? Uh, and whole cities are underwater there. Um, and with Shayla and Camila, who was here at the opening, um, we're seeing if we can bring the listening hour to people who are most affected in that state of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil, um, or Ukraine. Still every day there are attacks. Um, and this is just the biggest issues. But at any moment, somebody may say something that will raise a question, or somebody says something in their introduction. Uh, so most of you were here when uh, Nika, or many of you were here when Nika was talking about her son right at the beginning of this session. So it's easy to um, you're kind of nervous as the guide. Jonathan is a little nervous as the speaker. Um, we're not going to share stories today, but it's quite easy to not hear that, or put it the other way around. Can we be fully open to every little detail that someone tells us in those first words, because it may be a strong clue to the meaning of what someone chooses to tell. And if our ears are closed, or if we're not able to be fully open, then we may miss the deeper dimensions of somebody's stories. We will miss the deeper dimensions of somebody's stories. And of course, that raises the question that often comes up in playback theater, is that we have a special challenge always to look into ourselves and our own limitations in listening, our own biases, so that our ears can be as open as possible. Um, okay. Um, so all of this applies to what I've said applies to listening hour sessions, both online and live. I want to say a few things about live sessions, especially. Um, this is for Alice and all of you who are shifting or wanting to do more live sessions. Um, and it also, when the playback conference in South Africa, we had one meeting about the listening hour, and it was quite instructive to me because Kobelo said, online listening hour in South Africa, there's not much hope for it because who can afford the data to really do online sessions? Who can afford to pay for, you have to think live, and I never really thought about all this. So, if the listening hour is going to make its way in any but the richest countries in the northern world, we have to expand the live playback capacity. So when we're organizing the listening hour, we have some of the same challenges that we have in organizing playback theater, where you find yourself in situations where you're not sure if the conditions are adequate. In fact, this may happen often. Um, so, um, let's picture. I'm already picturing a community center in Brazil where people have taken refuge in the flooding, and it's packed with people. It's kind of chaotic. There are people responsible for making sure people have blankets or water, but they're too busy to really worry about the social side of things, like people sitting in a circle and having a listening hour. And so they say, well, just sit in that corner over there for your hour. And um, the guide will have to make a decision in the moment. Is this going to work? And why is this an ethical issue? The It's an ethical issue because if you get going and you're in the middle of it and it really doesn't work, somebody is exposing themselves, somebody is speaking and the others can't hear, the others aren't listening, the others are too distracted, the ritual breaks down, and in the end, people feel, it wasn't worth it. I wish I hadn't. Better not to. And so we make these really difficult decisions that always will have an ethical component. So again, I can't say to you, do it this way or do it that way. And many is the time that we have dared experiment. It looked like it wouldn't work, but we go ahead and it does. But we still have a big responsibility to make that decision. Or, of course, another kind of example is if you're being asked to do a listening hour for an organization, maybe being paid, and that organization has its own ideas about the purpose of the listening hour, has its own agenda for what should be, for the kinds of stories that will be told. There are times when we, for ethical reasons, might not agree to hold that session, to do that, to take up that invitation. And again, it's always a kind of negotiation and ultimately a decision. But there's always an ethical component to it. We want the stories to be for the good of the people telling and listening. not for the good of management or the good of somebody higher up in the hierarchy. And so we have to use our best judgment of whether the integrity of people's stories can be protected. Another something else that comes up has to do with the size of how many people in the session and how much time in the session. So the listening hour is still new. 4 years. For me, this feels very new, even though I'm excited by all of you and all of the others who might not be here today. So many people are engaged, so many people are involved, but the listening hour is still very new. And so in our trainings, we say, 4, 5, 6 people at the most as a good size so that there is space for everyone to tell and be listened to. Okay, that makes sense. And we have this idea of an hour. Well, this was my idea. And, there's something fresh about it. There's something clean about it. There's something about it that may help propel the success of the listening hour in our busy world. There's also a bit of theory behind it. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the French psychiatrist Jacques Lacan. Um, I'm only slightly familiar, and yet he had this practice in his own therapy sessions of telling a client uh, when they came in that the session today would be 10 minutes. They would pay for the full session, but it would only last 10 minutes. And there was something about this that was kind of inspiring. Apparently, it was very effective. Somebody got right down to business. What they really needed to say came popping out of them. Yes, very compressed. And that may have been, one of the influences. Uh, so 1 hour. Okay. So how many people and how long the session? So you find yourself in a situation where there, let's say you're at a university and there are students and there are 13 of them that really want to be in this session. And it doesn't seem easy to divide it into two. And well, do you give it a try? Well, we're all still discovering what works and what doesn't work. So why not give it a try? And yet, there's always an ethical dimension. So I would say I would never say don't give it a try. But with 13, depending on how long it is, there won't be space for everybody, or there may not be space for everybody. And you may be reinforcing patterns of silence. And then how long? And so there's somebody in the Netherlands who is a guide, and she's been working with the police, and she's been doing all day sessions with the police that consist of, a 3 hour morning and a 3 hour afternoon. And she said, well, no, they're all used to these 3 hours segments. And we had a discussion about it. And I said, well, the hour for the listening hour may still be efficient and may still be useful. So size and time is something that you have to feel your way, but as with everything, there's an ethical dimension because it's our personal stories. Um, I'm thinking also of one example I just heard about where somebody offered an online listening hour session, and a couple of people canceled at the last minute, so there were only 2 in the group. Okay, do you do it or not? Jenny's nodding and saying yes. Well, this guy did do it, and this guide bent the ritual because there were only 2, and decided to tell themselves also. So there were 3 stories. And this person said it worked out very well. Okay, but how much bending before actually something happens that might not work out so well? So we're both experimenting, we're learning, but we're also always trying to maintain our effectiveness, trying to maintain the integrity of the method, and as I've been emphasizing, maintaining a high ethical standard so that everybody always is going to feel better afterwards. Okay, I think that's the end of my speech part. And, I invite you to think about, what have I left out that's important? And most importantly, your own experiences with the listening hour, and if not with the listening hour, with other practices that may be relevant, what ethical issues have come up? Always knowing that if we're not paying attention to all of this, we won't even know what ethical issues come up. But as much as you can, to be aware of your past experience in the listening hour and related things. And let's have some discussion and then come back, and I will want to hear comments and questions, and we can talk about it a little more. Does that sound okay, everybody? Paulina, can we have groups of 5 people? And let's take 12 minutes. So 12 minutes is not so much, but enough for you to touch on certain things. And then there'll be time to have some questions and discussion. Okay, enjoy, everyone. Ethics, ethics for the listening hour. This is a time for you to speak. Yes, Nina.
I think I'm leaving the session with the understanding that you might want to be ethical responsible for your work, but you have to be all the time aware of that, and be aware that sometimes you are not ethical responsible, or you cannot be ethical responsible, or you need to learn more, or you need to, I don't know, do something more in order to be ethical responsible.
Yeah, I think it's a never-ending path. I would agree.
Just to be aware that it's a never-ending path.
We have to keep walking on that path and always try to learn more, and to be both ourselves and the world and our practice. So ourselves, the world, and this method, in this case, the listening hour.
Yeah, be aware of what we are aware of and what we're not.
Yes, very well said.
I think, yes, I think that we realize that you don't have to strive to be the most important person all the time, because it's, as important as the group feels connected with each other. It would be wonderful if everyone in the group felt that they were a part of something after the session.
Thank you. Yes, so the session very much is co-created. You know, spontaneity is a byword. And if, as the guide, we need to be too important, it will in the end depress people's contribution.
Yeah.
Yes, 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 I agree. So, you know, I like the metaphor of a midwife.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, Mary Elizabeth.
So I just wanted to share some of the things that came up in our group. We talked about
Yes.
political rants. We talked about confidentiality, what to do when something goes off the rails or feels out of control. Do you then interject the ethics of the listening hour? Do you actually make them explicit and see if that's effective? What do you do if someone's story really triggers someone else in the group? If somebody has a really bad internet connection, like how do you deal with people who don't have full attention, who aren't completely there? Do you include, exclude? How do you do that? And making it clear that not everybody needs to share and have that be a real invitation, as well as inviting everyone to share.
Good. And you mentioned some extreme cases.
Yeah.
That would arise very, very rarely. But in those instances, we may need to take extreme measures. Yes. Yes. We need to protect the space and everyone who's in it. Yes. Ash. Yeah.
Yes, hi everyone. So I also just want to speak about this one ethical procedure or conduct or whatever you want to call it, but it's something that I think I raised we raised in our group about the mindfulness of oneself. If I am not able to hold space for myself, how am I going to hold space for somebody else?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
cannot do that.
Yeah.
So it also questions the ethical boundaries of when do we learn ethics, or when do we learn ethicalities and unlearn them?
Yeah. And you know, we offer a listening hour and it's arranged weeks ahead of time. And then we have a huge argument with our partner, you know, an hour before, where you can, you know, you can hardly think, and you're a complete mess. And so, you know, how do you deal with that? And that is an ethical issue. Any other comments, questions? Okay. Well, yes. You want to say one more
Yes.
thing? Yes.
Just one more thing. I just want to say this is my third Listen Hour festival, and I am honored to be a guide. I know I just recently stepped into that role, and Listen Hour has opened this new broad perspective of theories that I'm arguing with myself constantly on a daily basis when I'm communicating with someone. So thank you for this beautiful platform to everyone.
So thank you. Thank you for that, Ash. And thank you everybody for joining. with me today to, share thoughts about this subject. And I want to encourage you all to keep the ethical dimension in mind, to know that the Community Culture Committee is here to support you, that Bea and I are here to support you. And we even have an ethical advisory committee yes, and I don't announce their names because I want them to be protected a little bit, but they're standing by for the most sort of thorny questions that might ever come up. And they have lots of wisdom, and they're here to help us navigate especially difficult moments. So we support you in trying to guide the listening hour as ethically as you can, knowing that we can always learn more. Have a wonderful festival, everybody. And for those of you who are going to be guides in sessions and lead panels, good luck, and see you soon. Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank
bye-bye.
you, Jonathan. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Jonathan. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.